What's going on, everybody? This is Bobby G, back again with another Saturday Shpiel. And today's Saturday Shpiel is titled Abraham's Example. The passages today come from the portion for the Torah reading or the Parashah readings, which in the Messianic community, for those of you who know, we also follow the New Testament as well, so instead of having 2 readings, we have 3. This one is called Lech Lecha, which means to go out. This is when we look at the passages when Abraham was called out. And Isaiah talks about Abraham's example, as Jesus does with in the Gospel of John. And also Paul goes back to Abraham's example in Romans. Matter of fact, the passages, if you want to go through them, are Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to chapter 17, verse 27. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 27 to chapter 41, verse 16, John chapter 8, verses 51 to 58, and Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 25. Now, when we look, first starting at Genesis, we look at how during these passages from chapters 12 to 17, where Abraham is called out from Ur of the Chaldeans, and is called to go to what eventually is known as the Promised Land. And we also know that he takes his nephew Lot with him, as well as his wife. Eventually they go to Egypt because of a famine. They come back to the land after Pharaoh gets cursed and Abraham gets kicked out. And at some point there ends up being a quarrel between Lot and Abraham's herdsmen or their shepherds, and Abraham says to his nephew Lot, I don't want any issues with you, if you go this way, I'll go this way, or if you go this way, I'll go the other way, because I want us to be peace, to live in peace as family, because we're family, right? And eventually you have Abraham coming to rescue his nephew, because his nephew ends up getting kidnapped because there are raiders, because of a war of 4 kings against 5 and all of that. And then he eventually ties to Melchizedek, which I know a lot of people are wondering how to say that even name, the Melchizedek or Melchizedek or Melech Tzedek is more of a proper pronunciation, which is King of Righteousness, from the city of peace, who comes from the city of peace. That's actually the literal translation of this particular individual. There's a whole theological study on that, but what ends up happening is Abraham gives a tithe, and later on there is the covenant of circumcision, which is a physical symbol of the covenant that God has already made with Abraham. And that one of the things that has come to pass is that that particular sign has become more custom and law than it has been understood as a sign of the covenant, but that's a whole other discussion. In Isaiah, there's a lot of going on there. The kingdom has split by this point into north and south. Israel in the north, Judah in the south, and there's a lot going on. But it brings up the example of Abraham again, who kept God's commandments, kept his laws, kept his charge. Same thing with regards to the Gospel of John, where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, the scribes, and all that, and saying, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. And he also said, before Abraham was, I am, which, for those who are wondering where the claim that Jesus claimed to be God is, John chapter 8, verses 51 to 58. You can look there. Also, in Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 25, what Paul really focuses on here is Abraham's example of really taking trust and going out and following God, even though he didn't quite know where he was going. And eventually, now, during Paul's time, we have what was still then known as the province of Judea, along with Galilee and the Decapolis, and so on and so forth. But the point of all this is that what they all point out is Abraham's example. What was Abraham's example? Was he flawed? Yeah, he kind of put Sarah in a tough spot, no question about it. If you go back and read the passages in chapters 12 through 17, you kind of see that. Nevertheless, Abraham learned his lessons, and he followed God, and he trusted God, and it says that he trusted the Lord, and the Lord accounted it to Abraham as righteousness. Why? Because he had a deep-seated trust in the Lord. That's what it means to have a heart like Abraham, or to have Abraham's example and follow his way, because he trusted God, kept his commandments, kept his laws, and obeyed God. And it was accounted to him to righteousness, even though it took a while for parts of the covenant with God to come to pass. As we walk, and as God was a friend of Abraham, God can be our friend. But first of all, we have to have a relationship with God, as Abraham did, which in our case means having a relationship with Jesus. It means trusting Jesus. Trusting the Holy Spirit, whom he sent, which is the third part of the Trinity, to be with us, to overshadow us, to give us wisdom, to give us discernment, to give us the gifts of the Holy Spirit that we are to use for the glory of the kingdom. And that's the other thing. Abraham did not seek his own glory when you look through the passages. He sought to do that which was right before God. And that is what we as believers are to do as well. It's to not seek after our own glory. It's not to seek after our own power or position. Not to say God can't give us power or put us in a position, but that's not for us to revel in, or to be greedy in, or to be walking around with our noses in the air as if we are somebody of ourselves. That doesn't mean we don't have inherent gifts that God has given us, and inherent talents that he's given us, or can give us talents through the Holy Spirit, again. But Abraham's example was not about him being powerful. It was about the power of God. It wasn't about Abraham being in a position to do much for himself per se. It was to do what was right in the sight of God, so that in doing right in the sight of God, he himself may be blessed. And so may his generations be blessed after him, so long as they follow the Lord as well. And so what I'm asking in this passage, in this third week of the Messianic calendar, is to take the time this week to follow Abraham's example, to trust God, to accept the new covenant, which is through Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, and to follow and to trust the Lord. I know we've had a hard year. I've had a hard year myself. But if we really trust in the Lord to lead us, if we trust in the Lord to know what God is doing, if we trust that what was done for us through Yeshua, through Jesus, was done for our good, and if we trust the discerning, the leading, the wisdom, and the strength of the Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, as it says in Hebrew, then we will see the blessings of God, and then we will have less anxiety, more peace, and more joy, which is our strength that comes from the Lord, to continue to trust God, even in the midst of all these things. My name is Bobby G. That's my Saturday Shpiel for this week. Lord willing, I'll see you all next week. Peace.